I didn't sleep last night. Not even for a moment. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that balcony. The crisp night air brushing against my skin, the faint hum of the party below, the city lights stretched out like a sea of stars. And him.
Kai.
I could still feel him, as if he had left an imprint on me. His hands on my waist, strong and unyielding. His lips grazing my neck, the low timbre of his voice wrapping around me like a promise, or a threat. The warmth of his breath against my ear when he leaned in close. Let me see you come all over my hand. It had been years since I had felt an orgasm so powerful, the kind that made me throw my head back and my toes curl. I shivered, even now, as the memory coursed through me, vivid and unforgiving. I spent the entire night wrestling with my body's betrayal. Each time I tried to escape the memory, it dragged me back, drowning me in sensations I couldn't ignore. My hand had moved between my legs, desperate to chase the same satisfaction he had given me, but it wasn't the same. Nothing would ever compare to the fire he lit beneath my skin. By the time dawn began to seep through the curtains, my frustration had twisted into something sharp and unbearable. How could I crave something so dangerous? How could I want a man who wielded power and fear so effortlessly, whose name alone could make people shrink into themselves? And yet, he made me feel alive. Alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. At least since the abduction. I had locked away every sexual part of myself. Sometimes I even questioned if the fantasies I had read about it in books were the reason this happened to me. The universe's way of punishing me for liking things, wanting things that were beyond normal. For so long, I had been a shadow of myself, moving through life with careful steps and hollow smiles. But Kai, he made me reckless. He made me feel. I hated him for it. I hated myself more. I threw myself into the shower, cranking the water as cold as it would go. It numbed my skin, but I welcomed the chill. I scrubbed at my arms and shoulders, trying to wash away the haze of the night before, the ghost of his touch. By the time I stepped out, my skin was raw, but my mind was no clearer. I dressed quickly, pulling on a simple black dress. My boots clicked against the floor as I walked to the mirror, tying my hair back into a loose knot. I kept my makeup light, just enough to conceal the dark circles under my eyes. Once I was sure I looked presentable enough, I left the room, eager for some breakfast. I stepped into the dining room, expecting the usual silence, the clinking of silverware against china, the quiet shuffle of the staff moving in and out. What I hadn't expected was my father sitting at the head of the table. I froze mid-step, my stomach twisting. He was never here at this hour. By now, he was always at his office, barking orders, making deals, controlling his empire. But today he sat there calm.
Too calm.
"Good morning, Leyla," he said, his voice smooth, almost pleasant. But that tone, it was the kind of deadly calm that sent a shiver down my spine, the kind that made my pulse stutter with dread. I hesitated, my fingers twitching at my sides. I hadn't even pulled out my chair yet, and already, something felt wrong. A million things ran through my head. I went back to every single moment from last night, from the time I had left the manor to the time I returned. And I thought of where I could have gone wrong. The quiet rustle of paper filled the room as my father slowly folded the newspaper and set it aside. Then, he lifted his gaze to me, pinning me in place with a glare so sharp it felt like a blade pressing against my throat. "Benny Santos is very angry," he said, his voice deceptively even. Being disrespected like that in front of so many people? It wounded his pride. I took a step back, barely breathing as he pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. So, he didn't know what happened to Jeffrey Graham. At least that was good. But I didn't. The words barely left my lips before he cut me off. And, do you know what he did? My father stepped closer, each footfall slow, deliberate. He came to stand right in front of me, towering over me, forcing me to tilt my chin up to meet his eyes. He pulled out of the 14th Street project. I barely had a second to register the weight of his words before his hand struck my face. The force sent me staggering back, my head snapping to the side. A sharp, stinging pain bloomed across my cheek, and the metallic tang of blood filled my mouth where the inside of my cheek had split. "You just cost me a $5 million deal," he seethed. I swallowed down the pain, forcing myself to straighten, even as my skin burned. "It's not my fault Benny can't keep his hands to himself," I said through gritted teeth. Another slap. My vision blurred for a second, the impact making my ears ring. Before I could recover, his fingers tangled in my hair, yanking my head back, so I had no choice but to look up at him. "You can't dress up like a whore and expect a man to be civil," he hissed. His breath was hot against my face, reeking of expensive cigars and control. "You wanted him to touch you. And instead of being grateful, you caused a scene, making your fiancé step in, no less. If I hadn't just promised you to Kai, I would have handed you to Benny myself to change his mind." Then, just as suddenly, he shoved me back. I hit the floor hard, my hands slamming against the cold marble as I gasped for breath. He, on the other hand, took his seat in the calm, casual manual, his eyes zeroing in on me from his seat. "Get the hell out of my sight. And go fix yourself." I didn't move at first, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then, slowly, I pushed myself up, swallowing back the sting of humiliation, of rage, of pain. And I left. Days later, the bruise on my cheek had turned from a purple blue to a yellowing red. I always had spare bottles of the best concealer money could buy, of which I applied layers today. But the garish-looking injury was still visible. Only once I was sure the bruise wouldn't be visible, I left my room. Father didn't like seeing the aftermath of his anger. I don't know the real reason, but it certainly wasn't guilt or shame. I skipped down the stairs and headed out the front door. The car waited by the steps and I got in. One guard drove, and another sat in the passenger seat. This is how it was every time I went out. The car ride into the city was uneventful, the hum of the engine filling the silence I didn't know how to break. My mind remained tangled in the events of everything that happened these past few weeks, replaying them over and over again. And I kept on coming back to one memory in particular: what happened in the balcony. What bugged me most was how I hadn't heard from him since. Not a single word. Not a call. Not a text. Nothing. It frustrated me. It's like he came down just to mark his territory, and then left. When the car finally pulled up to curb, I took a deep breath and got out. I was struck by the grandeur of the building I stood in front of. This was the most expensive boutique in Denver. It was nestled in the heart of the city, its wide glass windows displaying gowns that glittered like frost under the winter sun. The kind of place that screamed wealth and privilege, where every detail was tailored to cater to women like me. Or rather, women like the one I was supposed to be. As I stepped inside, the faint tinkle of a bell announced my arrival. The air was perfumed with lavender and something sweet I couldn't place. "Miss Castra?" The saleswoman, Danielle, greeted me with a wide smile, her blonde hair pinned neatly into a twist. Her sharp eyes scanned me quickly, a flicker of recognition sparking in them. And then her eyes went to my throat. My heart stuttered. For a moment, I was certain of the incoming judgment. That she would mention the headlines I had worked so hard to forget, the name that had been splashed across headlines 2 years ago. Castra heiress abducted. Naked pictures emerge. But she didn't. Instead, she kept her smile polite and professional, motioning for me to follow her deeper into the shop. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to relax, though the tightness in my chest didn't fade. We went through racks and racks of dresses on the entire bridal floor. I picked out a few, as did she. She also made sure to even pick out those I had glanced at and wondered about, but then moved on because I was unsure if I could pull them off. Once I was sure we had enough, we moved on to the trial part. Danielle hovered nearby, carefully arranging dresses on racks she had tentatively titled Yes, No, and Maybe. I stepped out of the fitting room in my first gown. It was delicate lace that hugged my frame perfectly, with an intricate train that swept behind me like a dream. But it wasn't right. The neckline felt too modest, the sleeves too constricting. It wasn't me, or the version of me I wanted to present to the world. "I think we can do better," I said softly, managing a polite smile. Danielle nodded in agreement, whisking me back to the rows of dresses. The fourth gown came closer. The fabric was exquisite, the silhouette flattering, but it still lacked something. I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I saw the dress. My breath hitched the moment Danielle brought it forward. It was one of the gowns I had been afraid of trying on. It was beautiful in a way that didn't just catch the eye, it demanded attention. A corset-style bodice adorned with rose gold beads shimmered beneath the soft lighting. Off-the-shoulder straps wrapped elegantly around the arms, accentuating the collarbones. The skirt cascaded in soft, flowing waves, each layer of fabric lighter than air. When I slipped it on, something shifted. I turned slowly in the mirror, running my fingers over the delicate beadwork, feeling the subtle pinch of the corset as it pulled me in and straightened my posture. The weight of the skirt swayed with every step, graceful and hypnotic. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. This was it. "I think this is the one," I said firmly, glancing at Danielle. Her face lit up with approval, and within moments, she was leading me to the counter. I barely noticed the transaction as it happened, my mind still caught in the glow of finding something that felt perfect. When Danielle handed me the receipt, I felt lighter, like the shadows that had clung to me since last night had loosened their grip, even if just a little. Stepping out of the boutique, I allowed myself to savor the moment. It wasn't just the dress, it was the act of choosing it. For once, something felt like mine. A rare, genuine smile tugged at my lips. But then my phone buzzed. I glanced down absently, expecting a text or an update from my father's staff. Instead, a headline glared back at me, stark and unrelenting. I froze. My breath hitched as the world tilted, the boutique's polished exterior and bustling street blurring into nothing. The words on the screen felt like a slap, each one sinking into my chest like stones, dragging me under. No. No, no, no. I clutched the phone tighter. My hands trembled, and my chest constricted as a familiar, suffocating fear clawed its way up my throat. It was the same fear I'd felt 2 years ago, the kind that gripped your ribs and refused to let go, that whispered you'd never be safe again. Another ping. And another. And another. The notifications came in a relentless flurry, each one echoing the headline that had already burned itself into my mind. I didn't think. I couldn't. Dropping everything, I bolted. I didn't care about the stares or the scattered calls from strangers. My only thought was to run. The car was waiting at the curb, the driver already stepping out to open the door when I reached it. I all but threw myself inside, slamming the door shut. To the manor, I choked out, my voice shaking as I struggled to breathe. "Just drive, now." The driver hesitated, glancing back at me in confusion, and then at his partner. "Go!" I shouted, my voice breaking. The car lurched forward, and I sank back into the seat, my hands gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might shatter. The notifications kept coming, the screen lighting up again and again. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I couldn't even bring myself to breathe properly. I knew my wedding would make it to the news. But I never thought it would be like this.